Right now, someone less capable than you is in control of the room, the deal, the relationship. Not because they're better, but because they're colder. You still care. You still feel too much. You still flinch when you're tested. You still overthink what they might say. You still panic when you're ignored. But they don't. They watch. They wait. They move only when it serves them. And that's why they win. You've been taught that emotion makes you human. But Machiavelli understood what that really means. It makes you vulnerable. And the man who shows vulnerability in a world ruled by power is food. You don't need more empathy. You don't need more openness. You need to become untouchable, not by hiding, but by mastering the one thing no one can teach you: emotional coldness, the ability to stand still while others panic, to smile when they expect rage, to stay silent when they beg for explanation, the ability to feel everything and reveal nothing. That's the edge. That's control. And this video is going to give it to you. Not through mantras, not through morning routines, but by ripping the warmth out of your responses and replacing it with precision. You've been trained to react, to flinch at disapproval, to defend at insult, to over-explain when misunderstood. You were raised to be agreeable, and that's the problem, because agreeable men don't control the world. They survive in it, quietly, forgettably. Machiavelli didn't trust kindness. He trusted consequence. He didn't teach men to be emotionally available. He taught them to be emotionally unreadable. Because once they know what moves you, they know how to move you. And once they can move you, you're no longer a threat. You're a tool. You're manageable. And manageability is death for a man who wants power. This is your turning point, the beginning of your disappearance from the world of reactive men, from the world where you have to explain your intentions, defend your actions, prove your worth. From now on, you say less. You move slower. You show nothing, because that's what cold men do. They don't try to be understood. They don't try to be liked. They become a question mark everyone else tries to decode. That's what you become. The ones who win are not the loudest. They're the ones whose silence unnerves the room. The ones whose stare breaks people before they speak. You don't need to yell. You don't need to argue. You just need to not react. And in that stillness, let the world feel your absence of approval, your refusal to engage, your invisible control. Watch carefully, because what's about to unfold will kill the part of you that still wants to be seen, and build a version of you no one can ignore. You weren't born emotionally weak. You were trained to be. From the moment you could speak, they told you to be polite, to be soft, to be kind, to be liked. Every time you frowned, they said smile. Every time you stood still, they told you to hug. Every time you said no, they asked why. And little by little, the cold edge inside you, the one that was built for survival, was dulled, until you became something tame, something safe, something acceptable, but not something powerful. That warmth they trained into you, that's not humanity, that's programming. And now that you're older, it's still running. Every time someone pulls away, you chase. Every time someone raises their voice, you shrink. Every time someone disrespects you, you try to fix it. But here's the truth. The more emotionally reactive you are, the easier you are to control. And that's exactly what they want. Because an emotionally reactive man is a predictable man. He apologizes when he's not wrong. He explains himself to people who don't deserve the explanation. He seeks closure from people who were never open to begin with. And Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. In The Prince, he warned of the danger in trying to be loved. He saw that a ruler who needs affection is a ruler who becomes a servant to it. That's why he taught detachment, not as cruelty, but as armor. The man who stays warm stays vulnerable. He's the man who softens his words so he won't offend. The man who second guesses his tone because someone might take it the wrong way. The man who absorbs other people's moods and carries them around like they're his responsibility. That man is not powerful. That man is a target. Your warmth makes you readable. Your reactions make you easy. Your sensitivity makes you strategic prey. That's why your first kill isn't a person. It's a pattern. The need to explain. The urge to react. The compulsion to be liked. You kill that, and you begin to see things as they are. You stop asking, why did they treat me that way? And start asking, why did I let them? You stop wondering, do they like me? And start wondering, do I even respect them? Because emotional coldness doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about what matters. your control, your energy, your outcome. Once you detach from needing to be understood, needing to be approved of, needing to feel safe, you become something else entirely. You become unpredictable, and unpredictability is power. So from now on, when they test you, you don't react. You observe. When they disrespect you, you don't defend. You calculate. When they withdraw, you don't chase. You vanish. Because every time you stay warm in a cold world, you bleed. And every time you bleed, someone feeds. From this point forward, your warmth becomes selective, reserved only for those who earn it. And to everyone else, you are the storm behind the glass. Cold, controlled, untouchable. Kindness is optional. Coldness is survival. In a world where everyone is performing, where every glance is calculated, and every silence is a test, you can't afford to be warm. Not until you've proven that your warmth won't be used against you. Because the second they sense you care, the second they sense you need something from them, that's when they start to play with you. And most men don't even see it happening. They think they're being respected while they're being studied. They think they're building connection while they're being evaluated for weakness. But the cold man, the truly cold man, doesn't get played because he's not even on the board. He watches the game from above it. That's what Machiavelli taught, even if he never said the word cold. He spoke of control. He spoke of appearing compassionate while hiding calculation. He spoke of strategic cruelty, not because it's pleasant, but because it's necessary. And emotional coldness is just that, a necessary weapon in a world that rewards those who feel nothing when it's time to act. When you're cold, you don't beg to be understood. You don't plead for fairness. You don't crumble when someone ghosts you, or insults you, or betrays you. You just absorb. You just calculate. That doesn't mean you're numb. It means you feel everything, but only show what serves the outcome. And that's the difference between being cold and being heartless. The heartless man destroys everything. The cold man chooses his target carefully and waits. Because that's the truth of power. If you want to win, you don't just need intelligence. You need distance. Space between your emotions and your actions. You need the power to say nothing when your ego screams to defend itself. You need the power to stay seated when your pride begs to stand. Because the man who can't control himself will always be controlled by others. And the one who can, he doesn't need to raise his voice. He doesn't need to explain. He doesn't need to prove. He just moves. And when he moves, others feel it. So from now on, coldness isn't something you hide. It's something you harness. Not all the time, not everywhere. But when it counts, when you're challenged, when you're insulted, when you're tested, you respond like the man who already knows the outcome. Because he's already calculated it. Because he didn't waste time reacting emotionally. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't give them anything. And that's why they fear him. Not because he attacked, but because he didn't have to. You want to become powerful? Learn to care in silence. Learn to hurt without reacting. Learn to plan while they rant. Because while they're screaming, defending, arguing, you're building. And the next time they try to provoke you, they'll find something terrifying. Nothing, no reaction, no weakness, no signal to track, just a wall of silence. Cold, deliberate, impenetrable. Because in a world that feeds on reaction, the man who feels but does not flinch survives. And the man who survives wins. You were told to be nice, to smile even when you're uncomfortable, to nod even when you disagree, to make others feel safe, even when they're threatening your peace. And somewhere along the way, you believed it. You started thinking that being liked was the path to being respected, that if you were kind enough, patient enough, soft enough, they'd treat you better. But Machiavelli knew the truth. Nice men aren't respected. They're used. They become the cushion, the scapegoat, the doormat. Because niceness isn't strength. It's submission with a smile. You think you're being noble, but what you're really doing is teaching people that your comfort doesn't matter, that your boundaries are flexible, that you'll bend, pause, apologize, and explain, just to keep the peace. And the people around you, they learn quickly. They don't see your kindness as generosity. They see it as access. They see it as weakness. They see it as something they can use. But the cold man, he's different. He doesn't attack, but he doesn't soften. He doesn't ask to be treated with respect. He behaves as if it's already required. He doesn't explain his boundaries, he enforces them in silence. And when someone tries to push him, they hit steel. Because coldness isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It's what happens when a man decides that his time, his energy, and his self-respect are no longer negotiable. And this is where your transformation begins. Not by becoming cruel, but by becoming measured. You stop nodding to be polite. You stop smiling to hide discomfort. You stop saying it's okay when it's not. You stop letting people drain you just because they want to be heard. You don't owe anyone your warmth. You don't owe anyone your patience. These things must be earned, and you decide who qualifies. Machiavelli warned that rulers who try too hard to be loved often lose both love and power. But those who are respected first are free to choose who receives their favor. That's the key. Respect isn't given to the most agreeable man. It's given to the man who makes it clear. Your approval changes nothing. He doesn't say yes to avoid awkwardness. He doesn't say sorry to diffuse tension. He doesn't shrink to make others feel big. Because he knows, when you make yourself small, you don't get thanked. You get forgotten. So here's your new rule. If it makes you smaller, say no. If it softens your edge, sharpen it. If it costs you your silence, ask if it's worth your power. Because every time you choose to be nice instead of being real, you give up a piece of your presence. And presence is everything. It's what lingers after you leave. It's what makes people pause before they speak. It's what shifts the room before you even open your mouth. The world doesn't need another agreeable man. It needs a man who can look kindness in the eye and choose control instead. You don't need to speak to control a room. You need to be felt. The men who rule environments don't walk in loud. They walk in slow, measured, silent, controlled. They don't scan the room for validation. They absorb it like gravity. Their presence speaks before they do. Their stillness demands attention, not because they're trying, but because they're unmoved. And that's the first law of cold presence. Don't chase attention. Command it through stillness. Watch closely the next time someone important walks into a room. They don't rush, they don't fidget, they don't fill silence with words. They pause, they observe, they let others speak first. Because power doesn't rush, power doesn't fumble, power doesn't ask, "Am I welcome here?" It acts like it already owns the space. And that's what you must become. Not loud, not arrogant, inevitable. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He knew the ones who ruled weren't always the kings. Sometimes they were the men who sat silently in the corner, watching, calculating, saying nothing. But when they did speak, the entire court leaned in. Why? Because they had already proven their power through presence, through posture, through the unspoken signal. I don't need to prove anything. I'm here to decide. So if you want to project power, start with your body. Stop moving too fast. Stop adjusting your stance. Stop nodding excessively. Move slowly, deliberately. When you enter a room, walk like you've been there before, like you've already owned it in another life. Your shoulders don't flinch. Your eyes don't dart. Your hands don't fidget. You take your time, because cold men are never in a rush. They're waiting for the others to make mistakes. You want to look dangerous? Stop announcing yourself. Let your silence speak. Let your pacing speak. Let your stare speak. When someone talks, let them finish. Don't interrupt. Just listen, without reacting. Because most people speak to gain control. But if you don't fight them for it, if you just observe, they start to lose it on their own. They start rambling. They start explaining. They start looking for approval. And all the while, you stay still. Not because you're passive, but because you're calculating. That's the cold presence. And it's terrifying to people who rely on noise, approval, and chaos. Because when they can't read you, they can't manipulate you. And when they can't move you, they start adjusting to you. Their energy bends. Their speech softens. Their eyes avoid yours. Why? Because stillness creates discomfort in the unsteady. And you've made stillness your armor. From now on, you don't enter rooms hoping to be liked. You enter with the assumption that your presence will be felt. Not through reputation, not through volume, but through unshakable control of your body, your pace, your silence. Because the man who needs to be noticed gets ignored. But the man who moves like a shadow and watches like a storm, he becomes unforgettable. Most men speak to be liked. You're not most men. From this point forward, you speak like your words are not suggestions. They're sentences. declarations, conclusions. You don't talk to fill silence. You don't talk to be polite. You don't talk to be included. You talk like someone who's already made up his mind, because that's the cold voice, and it changes everything. People don't respond to logic. They respond to conviction. They don't follow who makes the most sense. They follow who sounds the most certain. So stop qualifying your words. Stop asking for space. Stop finishing strong sentences with weak tones. When your pitch rises at the end of a statement, what they hear is permission to interrupt. When you apologize before you speak, they hear someone not worth listening to. When you explain too much, you shrink in real time. And Machiavelli would have seen it instantly. The man who cannot control his tone cannot control anything. So speak slow, speak low, speak with finality. Your tone should say what your face doesn't. This is how it is. Not open for negotiation, not soft, not afraid to make someone uncomfortable. You don't say, I think, you say, this is. You don't say, maybe we could. You say, we will. Not because you're arrogant, but because you understand something most men never will. The man who sounds like a decision becomes one. And if someone challenges you, you don't defend, you don't debate, you don't raise your voice. You lower it, you look at them, you pause, you say, that's incorrect. And then you move on. Because a man in control never needs to convince. He makes others realize. Let them be louder. Let them rant. Let them talk themselves into weakness. You stay calm. You stay deliberate. You speak with space between your words. Not because you're unsure, but because you don't rush truth. That's what powerful men do. They leave silence after a statement. They don't fear the quiet. They let it echo. Because that silence dares someone to respond. And most won't. Not when they feel the certainty behind what you just said. You want to know why your words haven't landed before? It's because you were speaking from emotion, from need, from fear. But the cold voice has none of that. It doesn't chase validation. It doesn't hope to be understood. It carries weight not because of what is said, but because of what isn't. It tells people where you stand, without ever having to raise your tone. So from now on, before you speak, pause, drop your pitch, remove the fluff, cut the softness, and say only what must be said. Say it clearly, say it once, and leave it there. Let them sit with it. Let them guess what you'll say next. And when nothing comes, let them realize the conversation is over. Because the man who controls the tone controls the outcome. And when you master that tone, your words stop sounding like opinions. They start sounding like commands. Every day, they test you, with a delay in their reply, with a passive comment, with a compliment that feels just a little too calculated. And if you react, you fail. Because those aren't random moments. They're probes, tests, strategic attempts to see if you'll bite. And the second you do, they've got you. They've learned what makes you flinch, what makes you soften, what makes you spiral. And now they can use it. Again, and again, and again. Machiavelli understood this long before Instagram therapists ever gave it a name. The world doesn't manipulate you by force. It manipulates you through reaction. That's why the most dangerous man is not the one who feels nothing, but the one who feels everything and acts on none of it. He doesn't flinch at an insult. He doesn't melt at a compliment. He doesn't panic when silence stretches for too long. He just observes. And when they realize he's not reacting, they get nervous because now they're exposed. Now he's in control. That's your edge. You stop being moved. You stop being pushed. You stop letting emotions leak out every time someone hits the right nerve. Because that nerve, it's not weakness, it's programming. From childhood, from repetition, from approval addiction. But you're not a child anymore. And approval doesn't buy power, it destroys it. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, you don't lash out. You don't prove them wrong. You don't make it a spectacle. You stay still. You slow down. You study. What are they really trying to get from you? Control? Validation? A rise? And once you know that, you have two options. Give them nothing, or give them silence. Because emotional triggers are traps. Praise makes most men compliant. Insults make them defensive. Withdrawal makes them chase. But you flip the script. When they praise you, you nod once and move on. When they insult you, you blink slowly and say nothing. When they disappear, you get quieter, colder, sharper, because your worth isn't shaken by someone else's behavior, and your value isn't measured in how fast you respond. It's measured in how little they can move you. The world expects men to be predictable. If they yell, you yell back. If they flatter, you soften. If they pull away, you pursue. But Machiavellian men don't follow scripts. They write them. They know that emotion, if unguarded, is leverage, and that leverage, if exposed, is weakness. That's why they build walls around their minds, not to stay out of life, but to stay above it, where strategy matters more than sensitivity, where calculation replaces compulsion, where stillness becomes a weapon. From this moment forward, you are not their entertainment. You are not their emotional toy. You are not their mirror. You are a wall they cannot read, a signal they cannot decode, a man who cannot be baited. Because the second they realize you can't be moved, they'll realize you're the one who moves them. Most men think winning means being louder, being faster, being more impressive, but cold men win for one reason. They don't play games they can't control. While others are fighting for attention, cold men are watching. While others are trying to prove something, cold men are deciding what's worth proving. While others are reacting, cold men are building. That's the formula. Coldness is not passivity, it's precision. And precision wins. Because the man who reacts gives away his position, but the man who observes, he gathers intel. When someone insults you and you stay silent, they reveal more in their discomfort than you ever could by arguing. When someone tries to bait you and you don't bite, you learn exactly where their ego lives. And when someone praises you but you don't soften, you see the shift in their eyes, that flicker of unease, because they thought you'd be easier to guide. Machiavelli taught this silently through every page of The Prince. Control was never about domination. It was about indifference to their moves and mastery of your own. When you're cold, you don't compete for attention. You create gravity. You don't chase people. You make them wonder why you disappeared. You don't try to fix misunderstandings. You let the silence make them doubt everything they assumed. That's how cold men win. They don't announce themselves. They let others fall apart first. Because when everyone else is driven by emotion, by approval, by fear, your calm becomes terrifying. Not because you're cruel, but because you're unreadable. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know if you care. They don't know what you'll do next. And that's exactly why they start adjusting to you. Not to connect, but to protect themselves from what they can't predict. This is what most men never understand. Predictability is a weakness. If they know how you'll react, they can steer you. If they know what you want, they can bait you. But when you move from cold calculation, when you react only when it's useful, when you speak only when it's necessary, your presence becomes a variable they can't solve. That uncertainty is your power. So while they burn energy explaining themselves, you sit. While they chase conversations to clear the air, you vanish. While they scramble to repair perception, you remain unbothered, unchanged, untouched. And what happens? They fold. They apologize. They try again. But this time, they come to you. This time, they calibrate. Because in every interaction, one person adapts, and the other commands. Let them adapt. Let them guess. Let them overthink your silence while you map your next move. Because when you're cold, you don't just win the argument, you make them forget why they ever thought they could challenge you in the first place. You can't stay who you are and expect to win. Because the man you've been, he was built to obey, built to be liked, built to survive, not dominate. Every hesitation, every over-explanation, every need to be seen, to be understood, to be accepted, that's not strength. That's software, installed in you by schools, by parents, by culture. And until you rewrite that code, you'll keep freezing when challenged. You'll keep softening when tested. You'll keep hoping they'll approve of a version of you that they trained to be weak in the first place. You want to become emotionally cold? Start here. Kill the need to be understood. Burn it. That's the root of your emotional chaos. That's the virus that makes you explain yourself when no explanation is needed. That's what makes you chase closure, validation, clarity from people who never deserved access to your inner world. Kill that, and the entire system collapses. Machiavelli never cared about being liked. He cared about power, and power begins with indifference. When you stop caring how they see you, you start controlling what they feel around you. Because the man who doesn't need acceptance, he's free. And freedom is terrifying to people still playing the approval game. So here's your rewrite. You no longer try to be seen. You observe. You no longer try to be understood. You move. You no longer try to be chosen. You choose. They won't know what changed, but they'll feel it. In your tone, in your gaze, in the way you don't flinch when they test you, in the way you don't chase when they leave, in the way you vanish without a word, and make them wonder if you ever really needed them at all. That's not bitterness. That's evolution. And detachment, that's not a mood. It's not an aesthetic. It's a weapon. You don't use it to punish. You use it to protect. Because not everyone should have access to your reactions. Not everyone should get to trigger you. Not everyone should get to study you, decode you, predict you. From now on, you make access earned. Not through effort, but through silence. The less you reveal, the more they fear what you might be thinking. That fear is power. And power is the new identity. The man you used to be wanted peace. He wanted understanding. He wanted connection. But you've learned, none of those things are possible without control. And control requires a level of coldness that looks dangerous to the weak. Because it is. Not violent, not loud, but permanent. You don't go back to warmth once you've seen how people treat your silence. You don't go back to softness once you've seen how they react to your stillness. You don't go back to seeking validation once you've realized that your absence has more value than your attention ever did. This is no longer about emotion. It's about identity. And from this moment forward, you don't react. You rule. This is where it all changes. Not your voice, not your posture, not your appearance, your identity. The shift is internal, silent, permanent. You stop entering rooms to be seen. You start walking in like you built them. You stop waiting to be invited. You become the reason the room exists. That's the final form of emotional coldness. You don't just control yourself. You control the atmosphere. Not by speaking, but by being. You are no longer shaped by who's in front of you. You shape who they become around you. You don't adjust. They do. You don't ask. They offer. You don't look around. They look at you. Not because you demand attention, but because your very presence creates imbalance in anyone who lacks it. Machiavelli knew this. The real rulers were never the ones wearing the crown. They were the ones the king looked to before making a decision. The one who sat silent in the court, unmoved, unreadable, and yet everyone felt his influence. Why? Because he didn't seek control. He embodied it. That's who you become now. You don't need loud words. You don't need wide gestures. You don't even need eye contact. You need certainty. You need silence that speaks louder than desperation. You need indifference that forces the insecure to question themselves. You need stillness that rattles the nervous. That's how cold men rule. Not through force, through gravity. So when they test you, pause. When they ignore you, vanish. When they praise you, analyze. When they insult you, watch. Your mind is not a public space. It's a locked vault, and they don't have the combination. Not anymore. You walk slower, you speak clearer, you show less, and every move you make carries weight. Not because you asked for it, but because people sense they don't get many of them. That scarcity, that's power. Because the more predictable you are, the less they respect you. But the more precise you become, the more they fear disappointing you, even if you've never said a word. This isn't performance. This is permanence. You're not trying to appear confident. You're becoming a force. And from this point forward, you no longer measure your growth in how happy people are around you. You measure it in how still they become when you enter, how carefully they speak, how they stumble over themselves while you remain motionless. Because you don't need to chase peace anymore. You are the storm, and the room bends to your gravity. From now on, you don't just walk in like you belong. You walk in like they're lucky you showed up at all. You don't need to announce your transformation. The world will feel it in your absence. The people who once ignored you will notice the void. The ones who took you for granted will feel the silence you left behind. And they won't say it out loud, but they'll wonder, where did he go? Why doesn't he chase anymore? Why doesn't he explain? Why doesn't he react? And that's the answer. You became cold. Not cruel, not bitter. Cold. Calculated. Unreachable. Not because you're numb, but because you finally understand the value of your attention, your energy, your access. You became the man who no longer offers explanations. You offer distance, not as punishment, but as clarity. You don't disappear to teach them a lesson. You disappear because they've already failed it. Machiavelli said that men should be treated generously or destroyed because small injuries invite revenge, but overwhelming distance, that invites silence. That ends the game before it starts. That's your power now. You don't hurt people. You outgrow them. And the moment they realize you're gone for good, that they can't provoke you, can't charm you, can't shake you, that's the moment they finally understand what they lost. But you don't even look back, because the man you were, he would have wanted closure. He would have waited for apology. He would have opened the door one more time. But that man is gone. Coldness killed him. And from the ashes rose someone they can't access, can't decode, can't break. You don't hold grudges. You hold the frame. You don't carry wounds. You carry silence. And silence is what makes them panic. You're not trying to be mysterious. You're just done explaining. You're not trying to punish. You're just done overgiving. You're not running away. You're walking towards something higher without telling them where. And that makes you dangerous because now they don't know how to reach you. And deep down, they know they shouldn't have had to. So now you vanish. You leave no trail. You speak only when required. You move like a shadow. And if you ever return, it's not to reconnect. It's to conquer. Your presence becomes legendary. Not because you were loud, but because when you were gone, nothing felt right without you. This is the final shift. You don't just speak differently. You move differently. You look at the world not with emotion, but with detachment. You don't react. You don't flinch. You don't hesitate. You're not playing the old game. You built your own. And if they ever see you again, they'll recognize the stare. But they won't recognize the man behind it. Because now you belong to no one. Not to emotion. Not to approval. Not even to the past. You belong to control. And that makes you unforgettable.